sing to the earth and heaven, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has brought us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us, facing the rising sun of our new day begun. Let us march on to victory is won.
Thank you, award-winning multi-instrumentalist Benjamin Hunter, for that soulful rendition of Lift Every Voice and Sing. Hello and welcome. I'm Lanisha DeBartoleben, President and CEO of your Northwest African American Museum. On behalf of our board, staff, members, and partners, thank you for tuning in. As we begin, we acknowledge that we are on the traditional land of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people, past and present. We honor with gratitude the land itself and the Duwamish people. We also honor the Coast Salish people of this region. We acknowledge that we are on the unceded ancestral lands of a people who are still here, continuing to honor and bring to light their ancient heritage. We are so grateful for our African ancestors who survived the Ma'afa, the Middle Passage, who endured the violence of slavery and the indignity of racial oppression, who had the courage to pack up and head north and west to the Northwest, who blazed trails for us to be here and to be ourselves here. And we thank our sponsors and partners for co-presenting tonight's conversation with us. The University of Washington Department of Communication, chaired by Dr. Christine Harold. The University of Washington Race and Equity Initiative, led by Ricky Hall and Dean Ed Taylor. The University of Washington Department of Philosophy, chaired by Dr. Andrea Woody. and the Seattle University Office of Diversity and Inclusion, led by Vice President for Diversity and Inclusion, Natasha Martin. We thank our 4 generous sponsors. The Northwest African American Museum is and has always been an essential gathering place. When COVID-19 closed our doors, it simply widened the opportunity for us to reach even further. And when that happened, we created a virtual series called It Takes a Village, because in order to thrive, indeed, it takes a village. This virtual conversation that we will have as a village is timely, and we believe it will be transformative and informative for us all. Dr. Cornel West inspires truth, love, and especially hope. Because of the words of Dr. West, NAAM started Historians on Hope, an online series in which we posted thoughts from Black historians across the country as they contextualized contemporary circumstances with messages rooted in hope. Because of the words of Dr. West, NAAM has created our very own inspirational regional choir called ACE, the African American Cultural Ensemble, or ACE, which will debut on Juneteenth. You see, words, when filled with hope, have the power to create and to sustain, the power to move us from calamity to collective wellness, from failure to flourishing, from weariness to wokeness, from pain to peace, from woundedness to wholeness, from hurt to healed. In times like these, we need conversations like this. We've collected pre-event questions from so many of you, and a common theme is this inquiry about what is the most important thing, the most radical thing, the most pressing thing that we all can do for constructive action and informed positive activism. Well, Dr. West will address those questions tonight. And we are grateful beyond measure to have Dr. Ralina Joseph as our moderator. Dr. Joseph is a scholar, teacher, and facilitator of race and communication. She is Presidential Term Professor of Communication, the founding and acting director of the Center for Communication, Difference, and Equity, and Associate Dean of Equity and Justice in Graduate Programs at the University of Washington, Seattle. Dr. Joseph is the author of 3 books and numerous articles on race, gender, and communication. During the 2019-2020 school year, Dr. Joseph was our scholar in residence here at NAAM as a Mellon Scholar and Society Fellow. Her latest book, Generation Mixed Goes to School, Radically Listening to Multiracial Children, came out last month. She is currently writing a book of essays based on her public scholarship work, including the work at NAAM, entitled Interrupting Privilege, Talking Race and Fighting Racism. Thank you so much, Dr. Joseph, for being with us tonight. I will now turn it over to Dr. Joseph, who will then introduce our honored and esteemed guest tonight, Dr. Cornel West. So you all prepare your questions and prepare to be inspired and empowered on tonight. Thank you and enjoy.
Thank you so much, Lanisha. I'm so overwhelmed and so thrilled to be here. And tonight I've been given the incredible honor and the daunting task of introducing, and later tonight of being in dialogue with Dr. Cornel West. Dr. West has loomed large as a legend in my mind for decades, and I suspect that this is the case for hundreds of you in our audience tonight. As a Ph.D. student in ethnic studies with a specialty in African American studies, West's oeuvre was at the center of my qualifying exam reading list, the stage that all graduate students understand as the moments that marks them as true scholars. Who we read at that moment really defines our careers. After receiving my PhD, I was a Ford Foundation postdoctoral scholar sponsored by African American Studies at Princeton. I remember my jaw dropping when the Cornel West not only came to hear my colloquium talk, but provided me with loving and substantive feedback and called me Sister Ralina. After we spoke at that evening, I was too flustered to share the fact that my dog-eared copy of his classic book, Race Matters, published in 1993 and republished in 2017 with a new introduction, functions and continues to function as a centering text, a type of beacon for me, providing clarity, calm, and a perfect quote whenever I hit a moment of crisis. Race Matters is just one of Dr. West's 20 books and 13 edited collections. As many of you all are indeed wondering, he is currently a professor of the practice of public philosophy at Harvard University. He also holds the title of Professor Emeritus at Princeton. Dr. West has taught at Union Theological Seminary, at Yale, at Harvard at an earlier moment, and at the University of Paris. He graduated Magna Cum Laude from Harvard in 3 years and received his MA and PhD in philosophy at Princeton. In his Boston Review article, Why Cornel West's Tenure Fight Matters, Robin D.G. Kelly notes, Dr. West is a formidable intellectual who works in the interstices of philosophy, theology, cultural criticism, political analysis, and social critique. He has produced a massive body of work that cuts across forms and disciplines. Books, articles, published dialogues, lectures, debates, and commentary displayed across several different media platforms. Kelly also notes that Dr. West has been the subject of several scholarly books. To just name a few, Mark David Wood's Cornel West and the Politics of Prophetic Pragmatism, Rosemary Cowan's Cornel West, The Politics of Redemption, Clarence Johnson's Cornel West and Philosophy, and Keith Gilliard's Composition and Cornel West Towards a Deep Democracy. And Kelly also makes the important point, quote, only a handful of West's tenured colleagues can make such a claim. And beyond all of this, he is an immensely popular teacher and a stalwart supporter of student activism. If I were to properly cover the full array of Dr. West's accomplishments, we would not make it to his talk tonight. So on my way to passing the mic to Dr. West, please allow me to share a quote from Race Matters that has recently given me great comfort. Dr. West writes, in these downbeat times, we need as much hope and courage as we do vision and analysis. We must accent the best of each other, even as we point out the vicious effects of our racial divide and pernicious consequences of our maldistribution of wealth and power. With those words of genius, please join me in welcoming the incredible legend to our virtual Northwest African American Museum stage, Dr. Cornel West.
Oh, thank you for those very kind and generous words, my dear sister Ralina. Good God, it's hard to believe it was just a few weeks ago we were at Princeton, but I guess those weeks accumulating here, now we have years. But I salute the work that you do, the tremendous force for good that you are, not just at University of Washington, not just in Jimi Hendrix and Quincy Jones's city of Seattle, but in this country and around the world. And I love to see this kind of wonderful relationship with the Northwest African American Museum. It's consecrated space. And of course, it is led by our visionary and courageous leader there, our dear sister Lanisha. And I'll just say Lanisha, Sister D, because she's got that wonderful last name with that melody in it that I sang out of tune. So but she is she's just a gem and a jewel. And it's good to see Brother Ed Taylor and Sister Andrea at Philosophy Department, University of Washington, and Patrice and all of the other, Natasha as well at the other Grand Institution of Higher higher learning. Each time I come to Seattle, I'm reminded of my times with Brother Paul Taylor, who's now chairman of the philosophy department at Vanderbilt. He was in the philosophy department there. He's a Morehouse brother, just like Sister L. Patrice's husband and son now. He's a Morehouse man. And John Taves, who was my teaching assistant under H. Stewart Hughes in 1970, along with Martin J. He was there at University of Washington for many years in the history department. And I had a great love and respect for him and his work. It's a very difficult time for me because I just lost my mother. And so I've been wrestling, I've been grieving. We just picked out her coffin and been twice to the cemetery, and bodies are so backed up, we can't have the funeral for another 2 or 3 weeks. And so I'm blessed to be here. And of course, I'm going to give it everything I've got while I'm here. I am in no rush whatsoever. We don't go by mechanical time. We go by the spirit. But at the same time, I just want to be honest and candid in terms of what's taking place in the dark corners and in the central parts of my own soul and heart. Irene B. West. I am who I am because somebody loved me. Somebody cared for me. Somebody tended to me. Even I say her name and the bells start ringing. This is the kind of mama I had. And I think this is true for all of us because we have to view ourselves as persons who are shaped by figures and forces bigger than ourselves. You see, that my mother was a great wave, but in an ocean. She was a product of a great tradition, of a grand people, of a Black people who, in the face of 400 years of chronic hatred, dished out every generation some powerful love warriors, lovers of truth, lovers of beauty, lovers of goodness, and for some like myself as a revolutionary Christian, lovers of God. You think Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, and that great Sunday school teacher and magnificent organic intellectual called Ida B. Wells Barnett, W.E. Du Bois, all of these were love warriors. James Baldwin, love forces us to take off the mask we know we cannot live within, but fear we cannot live without. Stevie Wonder, love in the need of love. Toni Morrison, Beloved. John Coltrane, Love Supreme. We can go on and on and on. What does it mean to be part of what the Isley Brothers call a caravan of love? To stay on the love train of the OJs. Those are not just metaphors to be flung into the sky. They are lives to be lived. Flesh to be affirmed, as in that great moment, probably the greatest moment of 20th century literature with Toni Morrison's Baby Suggs in the Clearing. And that sermon concretized, fleshified by the love in every part of her body, trying to connect it to other bodies, and then the heart, then the soul, but also the mind. Yes, that's the tradition of a people. Choices made, decisions put forward by a people in the face of chronic institutional hatred, in the face of 400 years of being terrorized. Here come the freedom fighters who want what? Freedom for everybody. We don't want Black versions of the Ku Klux Klan. We want freedom for everybody. That is what it means to talk about Northwest African American Museum, consecrated by those who come in Seattle and all around the world saying, we want to keep track of the doings and sufferings of these peoples, the creativity, the unbelievable breakthroughs, the various ways in which they persevered, the various ways in which they prevailed. How did they do it? And what do we learn from them, even in this grim and in this very, very dim moment in which we find ourselves in the history of the species, in the history of the empire, in the history of Black people. Yes, traumatized for 400 years, but here come the wounded healers, not wounded hurters. That's the worst of Black folk. And every people has their best and have their worst. Yes, there's a history of Black gangsters. Yes, there's a history of Black thugs. Yes, there's a history of Black mendacity. Yes, there's a history of Black criminality. Indeed, because we're human like everybody else. But at the same time, yes, especially in the name of Irene B. West, who was human all the way down, and yet decided to fight against the criminality, fight against the evil, fight against the cowardliness, fight against the envy, fight against the resentment that is shot through every human soul. That battlefield that constitutes the soul, in which Black people have had to decide, will we be love warriors? Will we be freedom fighters? Will we be wounded healers? Or like the great Louis Armstrong, that genius of all geniuses, who was all of those, but also a joy spreader. Everywhere he went, he just had joy oozing out of his heart, mind, and soul and body. And yet his close partner said what? He was the saddest man that we ever met. How do we come to terms with those heights and those depths? How do we come to terms with that complexity and ambiguity? Yes, how do we come to terms with that hybridity coming out of the hybrid town and city of all hybrid towns, New Orleans, with the French and the Africans, with Haitians, with Negroes like myself, gut bucket Negroes, refined Negroes, Creoles, all of it mixed together, playing European instruments in ways the Europeans hadn't conceived of. That's all right. We like the saxophone of Adolphe Sax, created in Belgium in 1848, but Coltrane played that European instrument in such a way that you're gonna put some serious surprise and shock and appreciation in the ears and in the hearing of the Europeans who created the instrument. We're not talking about these monolithic categories like just white and Black and brown and indigenous. We talk about a humanity that is intertwined in such a way that we confront vicious, institutionalized form of white supremacy, indeed, but no form of white supremacy can ever exhaust our humanity. We got spillover, we got excess. Try to reduce us all you want, but you can't keep track of this kind of creativity. You can't keep track of this kind of humanity. You can't keep track of this kind of solidarity. Somehow we're going to get around it. We're going to get under it. We're going to get above it. Why? Because we committed to something bigger than ourselves. What is it, Brother West? It's what the Northwest African American Museum is all about. It's about love of truth. And the condition of truth is to allow suffering to speak. And when suffering speaks at its highest level, it enacts the anthem of Black people, lifting every voice. Imani Perry has taught us that. But it doesn't say lift every echo. No, we're not extensions of the echo chamber. No. We're not copies. We're not simulacra. We're not semblances. We are original, just like Erykah Badu. She's an original. No voice like her in the world, just like Aretha. She's an original, just like Luther Vandross, just like Johnny Hathaway. We can go on, and we got to the dramatics and the Jones Girls or the Emotions yet. What is it about their originality, grounded in their creativity? Well, it has everything to do with what the museum is about, which is the ways in which integrity in the face of oppression, honesty in the face of deception, decency in the face of insult, and courage in the face of brute force is made real, that we can see it. It's not our sermons preached, it's our sermons seen that keeps us going. The preacher might enable what is seen, but what is seen are the examples, the concrete examples, like Irene B. West and like so many others who you could touch, who you could hug, who you could learn from and listen to. That's what's kept Black folk going. That's why museums like what we have in Seattle become so crucial. There's a wonderful line in Immanuel Kant's Critique of Pure Reason. Actually, it's on page 177 in the white translation. It says, examples are the go-kart of judgment. Examples are the go-kart of judgment. We have to have exemplified, we have to have figures who exemplify what is talked about. So we don't need more discourses on hope. We need people who are hope, who constitute hope concretely, fleshified in the way in which the great Hortense Spiller has talked about it, Mama's Baby, Daddy's Maybe. So you can touch it, embodied, enacted. That's what museums are about, to give us a sense of what is real, and you can't get it read as real unless you engage in an excavation. That's why education is so very important. That's why Carter G. Woodson's classic of 1933, The Miseducation of the Negro, is so crucial. You got to get beneath the lies. You got to get beneath the mendacity. You got to get beneath the criminality. None of those define us. White supremacy is a lie. And Black love under white supremacy is a crime. And Black history is a curse. And Black freedom is a pipe dream. And Black hope is a joke under white supremacist Egypt. It's a lie. We got to get under it. That's why Du Bois begins the souls of Black folk. The first line in his forethought, a gesture toward Prometheus, the provider of human possibility with fire. What does he say? Herein lie buried. Buried. It's an invitation to excavation. You got to get under. Yes, Black folk have been the underground, the night side. But if you get deep enough in the night side, you're going to see some light that you don't see on the other side of town. If you get deep enough in the underground, he understood it, Dostoevsky understood it in 1864 with notes from the underground. You're going to reveal some things that have been hidden and concealed, rendered invisible in the language of Ralph Ellison, or to be invisible, written by that genius from Chicago named Curtis Mayfield. I wish I could sing. Oh, I wish I could sing. To be invisible, Curtis says. Dropped out of school in 8th grade, never went to college, but a college went through him. That's right. Our genius comes in a variety of different forms. Some of us at University of Washington, some of us in the hood in Seattle, some of us in the AME church, some of us like me, Holy Ghost hang loose Baptists, some of them in the Pentecostal church, some of them gave up on religion and went atheistic, some of them are agnostic, some of them are non-binary, some of them are gay, some of them are lesbian, some of them are straight. Yes, that's right. Let's lift every voice. Every voice. That's the Johnson brothers from Gut Bucket, Jim Crow, Florida. Who wrote that? James Weldon and Rosamond. They already knew we had to be inclusive. Moments of equity, indeed. Moments of inclusion, indeed. Moments of diversity, indeed. But in the end, it's about integrity, honesty, decency, generosity, courage, vision, and fundamentally, what sits at the very center of the museum in Seattle, what sits at the very center of the greatest tradition in the modern world when it comes to being on intimate terms with catastrophe, and in the face of that catastrophe, unleashes creativity and compassion. That's the Black musical tradition. And what sits at the center of that Black musical tradition is kenosis, Kenosis. And what is kenosis? The emptying of oneself, the giving of oneself, the donating of oneself. Brother Taylor was talking about the funeral of his precious mother. People coming up to him from all walks of life. Folk he never heard of. So let me tell you about your mama. Everywhere she went, she was giving of herself. Everywhere she went, she was always concerned about others. Everywhere she went, she had a generosity flowing out of her, a joy flowing out of her. That's kenosis at its deepest level. It's a wonderful line Curtis Mayfield wrote for Gene Chandler in the song Just Be True about 1964. Where he says, I've given you all of me and plan to give even more, baby. How you gonna give more when he's already given out? Sweet love and affection, and even more is in store. That's not just a off-the-wall lyric. Sly Stone has it in Sing a Simple Song. I'm living, loving, over-loving. Sly, how you gonna overcome by over-loving? Listen to this. Come on, Larry. Come on, Larry Graham. Take it with us. That's what James Brown does at the end of a concert after 3.5 hours of giving every fiber of his being. He says, I'm an extension of you. You're an extension of me. Did anybody come here to hear a song we didn't play? You didn't play Soul Power. He said, hit it, Bootsy. Hit it, Clyde. We come to serve the people. We're not here spectacle. We're not here to everybody look at us and see how wonderful we are. We ain't peacocks walking around strutting. Peacocks strut because they can't fly. We eagles. We came here with a nobility, with a royalty in order to serve greatness. Ain't got nothing to do with Napoleon, nothing to do with Alexander the Great, nothing to do with Genghis Khan, nothing to do with dictators, nothing to do with highly folk in high spotlights. Greatness has to do with the quality of service to others. That's what's kept the Black tradition going, the Black freedom movement going. That's what Ella Baker understood. That's what Fannie Lou Hamer understood. That's what Marcus Garvey understood, all at their best. Now, all of them have limitations. If I had to choose between Ella and Marcus, I'm with Ella, but that's all right. I love Marcus anyway. I just got to critique a patriarchy he didn't have his intent. That's fine. But Marcus is still part of the tradition. Why? Because that brother would get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, already have his mind focused on Black people and Black freedom, and spend that whole day giving every moment of who he was and every ounce of his energy to help somebody. And in this case, to help Black folk come to terms with what was happening in 1917 and 18 and 19, those vicious white supremacist attacks. And it was more than the police. It was also fellow citizens. It was also fellow citizens, you see. That's what kenosis is. In all of its various forms. It could be a painter like Jacob Lawrence. It could be a poet like Gwendolyn Brooks. It could be a politician like Shirley Chisholm or Adam Clayton Powell Jr. or Harold Washington. It could be a businesswoman like Mary Ellen Pleasant, who's known as the godmother of human rights in California, who gave a white brother named John Brown $800,000 in 1856 to allow him to engage in his assault on the bastion of white supremacy in Virginia. That note he had in his pocket when he was executed was from a Black woman named Mary Ellen Pleasant. That she had married a white brother who was a robber baron. He dropped dead, so she ended up inheriting all of his money. And she used all of that money for John Brown, for centers for the homeless and for alcoholics and a whole host of things in the 1850s. And she'd begin every speech saying what? I'd rather be a corpse than a coward. Mary Ellen Pleasant, what you talking about, sister? Martin Luther King gonna say the same thing in 1962. I'd rather be dead than afraid. Kenosis, giving it all. And the Black people have no monopoly on this. It's a human thing. We just talking about chocolate folk at the moment. Because we done took it to a height that America's never seen. And now that America's got the blues, they're gonna either learn something for blues people or they're gonna lose their democracy. That's why if it wasn't for the Black women primarily and some Black folk in general to push out the gangster of the White House of Trump, we'd have a neo-fascist America right now. It wasn't 200,000 Black soldiers that joined the Union Army in the 1860s. Confederacy could have won. If it wasn't for the freedom fighters in the 1960s, America could have gone fascist earlier than it almost went in 2020. That doesn't mean Black folk get that by means of skin pigmentation. No, not at all, not at all. We are treated certain ways because of our skin pigmentation. We got to choose to be love warriors. You got to choose to be a freedom fighter. You got to choose to be a wounded healer, willing to give, serve, donate, sacrifice for others, beginning in your own house, in your own crib, in your own hood, in your own ghetto, in your own neighborhood, and let that spill over. And yes, it gets to our vanilla brothers and sisters. And there's always been white brothers and sisters who have been willing to fight against white supremacy. John Brown I already mentioned. Lydia Maria Child, appealed in favor of that class of Americans called Africans, inspired by David Walker's appeal. There's 2 years, that's a white sister. Ann Braden, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. We can go on and on and on. It's just that they got a whole lot of cousins. And they constitute a prophetic leaven within that larger vanilla loaf. But Black folk in our movement has always been embracing of those who choose integrity, honesty, decency. It is not just allyship, it's solidarity. John Brown wasn't no ally. Brother willing to die for Black people. That's not an ally, that's a brother. Ann Braden wasn't an ally to Angela Davis when she worked with her all across the nation to try to make sure she fought against the FBI and fought against the government trying to send her to jail for life. We can ask Sister Angela and all of her greatness. Who's Ann Braden? I was there when we all had a salute to Ann Braden. Angela had tears in her eyes. This is my sister. Oh, you got a white ally. Now you misunderstand it, getting it twisted. You're getting it twisted. You don't understand what solidarity is. We're talking about human coming together, grounded in integrity, honesty, and decency at its deepest level. That's what that's about. You see, and that's crucial. That's like saying that old brother Fred on the drums or Sliding the Stone was an ally. No, he's a drummer in the band. He just happens not to be Black. The drummer in the band. He's part of the band. That's solidarity. That's what we are after. Thank God we got Black Lives Matter. Thank God we've got Me Too movement. Thank God we got the trade union movement trying to come back. But we have to make clear that we learn from the best of the Black tradition that has been rooted in is love warriorship, it's freedom fighting, and it's wounded healing that's tied to integrity, honesty, decency. This is crucial because we live in one of the most commodified moments in the history of the world. And commodification is basically about just getting over by any means. It's the 11th commandment, thou shalt not get caught. It's about the valorizing of wealth. It's about the valorizing of position. It's about the valorizing of fame, the valorizing of spectacle. Look at me, look at me. I'm so smart. I'm so rich. Look at my mansion. Look at my trophy spouse. Look at my clothes. Oh, how superficial. We need an invitation to excavation. We need to get beneath some of this mess. Let's get where the real stuff is. Let's get to the funk. Yeah, we are funk, but we ain't into deodorizing this stuff. We don't want to sanitize and sterilize and pasteurize and homogenize it. We want the funk. And what is the funk? That's where the love is. That's where the freedom is. That's where the struggle is. Samuel Beckett calls it a mess. That's our Irish brother. Mess and funk, they got some strong overlap. But in that funk, just like your mama's womb when you're born, it's got that blood, that pain, and that joy. Yeah, Frankie Beverly understands that. Mays understands it. That's right, it's joy and pain at the same time. It's the freedom there as well. We've always wanted to get through the funk for our freedom, and that freedom is predicated on a quest for dignity as well as overcoming the poverty, the decrepit schools, the inadequate health care and housing, and not enough jobs with a living wage. Yes, prosperity has its role, but it's subordinate to a spiritual and moral integrity. It's not just about the prosperity, not just about the money. When we hear our brothers, geniuses from Staten Island, talk about cream, cash rules, everything around me, but it don't have to rule me. That's the reason I'm saying it's around me, but we can be counter-hegemonic. We can be oppositional. Or in the language of our dear sister, Sadia Hartman, you see, we could be wayward. We could be errant. We could be over against. That's the best of our tradition. That's one of the crucial reasons why the museum in Seattle is such a special, special place. I know it'll put a smile on my mama's face. It's putting a smile on my face right now because it's consecrated. It's consecrated by not just the leadership, but the folk who come through, the folk who support it, in recognizing that it holds up the grand examples of greatness. And we must have a habitual vision of greatness. And he who's greatest among us, she who's greatest among us, they who are greatest among us will be those who loved us, who loved truth, which means they also corrected us, which means they also criticized us. Those who loved beauty, they held on to excellence in the face of trauma and terror, as Rilke would define it. And they loved goodness. And goodness is about justice, but not just justice. Any justice that's only justice soon degenerates into something less than justice. You got to have love and care and concern at the center of it. A justice itself and never enough gas in your tank to allow you to be a long distance runner. But Harriet Tubman didn't go back 19 times in the belly of the beast for justice. She went back because she loved Black people. And that's deeper than just justice. In fact, she had to carry her gun. Sometimes she had to threaten some of those Negroes out of love. It wasn't justice. It's deeper than justice. Justice is crucial, but it's not the end all be all. It's about the love at that deepest level. And that's what we understand about our mamas and our daddies. It's unconditional, it's unequivocal. There no matter what. Why? Because there's something about this steadfast commitment to the others grounded in of love. Ain't got nothing to do with the namby-pamby sentiments of Hollywood. That's what Black love is. That's what human love is. We're going to talk more about it, but I know I should be bringing this to a close. But the crucial thing is, I'm just blessed to be here in Seattle. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. And we are so blessed to have you here and to have you, as Lanisha was saying, in our backstage time, just filling us up. And in this moment, to think about the ways in which we can center love, that we are still healing from all these moments of racial trauma. And I'm so sorry for the loss of your mother. We're healing disproportionately from the ways in which COVID has impacted our communities. We're healing from all of these different places. And so we have so many questions that are really about how do we combat our exhaustion? How do we combat our constant fear? How do we access this love and become these freedom fighters for justice?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, there's a very special brother, Henry McGee Jr., whose son, Henry McGee III, is my very, very dear brother. We were in college together. When he talks about the love of his father and his father's love of him, that I think that's one of the crucial starting points. That's why I always begin all of my lectures saying that the biggest blessing and honor I've ever had is being the second son of Irene and Clifton. Now, everybody doesn't have that particular gift or grace to have parents who love them as much as my parents love me, but it means that we're going to have to find it somewhere else. We're going to find it in friends. We're going to find it in partners. We're going to find it. We were talking about the reading club. You all, the reading club that you have. What's the name of that reading club you got?
The Brown Girl Book Club.
Yeah, and y'all got a lot of love there, all right?
We sure do.
And that love of truth, intellectual contestation, arguments, discourse. Then you got the deep psychic love. You got the spiritual love. Some of y'all religious. Some of y'all might not be. Some of y'all believe in God. Some might not. You're still all together because love transcends all of that. There's no doubt about it. But part of the problem, though, is that it's, you have to have vulnerability in order to have any kind of love, not just of persons, but also of truth and goodness and beauty. And in a world that's gangsterized, it's very difficult to want to be vulnerable because you figure you'll be crushed. You see? Yes. And so the question becomes, how do we create pockets where vulnerability is possible, thereby making intimacy possible? I don't think there's real genuine intimacy without vulnerability. And when you lose the very capacity, or you don't cultivate the capacity for vulnerability, then you don't get intimacy, then you don't really get love. And all you can have is lust and domination and manipulation and titillation and stimulation. And so your culture ends up being a joyless quest for insatiable pleasures. Everybody get titillated and stimulated, and their soul is empty. You say, oh Lord, what does it profit a people, a nation, to gain anything, let alone the world, and you lose your soul, you lose your capacity to love. You're like Hamlet. Hamlet lost the capacity to love, even though he was so intelligent and full of intellectual reflection and so forth, you see. And that's one thing that Black folk have to fight, because for so long, even given our vicious treatment of 244 years of barbaric slavery and another 100 years of neo-slavery called Jim and Jane Crow, American terrorism, and now we got Jim Crow Jr. in so many ways, then at our best, we did cultivate the capacity for vulnerability and intimacy and learning how to love and teaching the world much about love. But as we get more commodified, as we get more accommodating and assimilated into a mainstream culture obsessed with narrow pleasures and money and status, then we lose our sense of who we are. And that's what soul is. Soul is the sharing of a soothing sweetness against the backdrop of catastrophe. And so when you're no longer a sweet and kind and tender people, everything is dominating and harsh and tough and ready to crush. You ain't gonna get no Otis Redding singing "Try a Little Tenderness."
Well, and I think that the vulnerability is about also that it has to have trust in order to be vulnerable, in order to be intimate.
True.
You have to have trust. I mean, and what you're talking about is so much theft that happens of Black culture, theft of Black lives. And so why have that trust, right? Why be laid bare and when you know you're going to be hurt?
Well, and it begins both within Black communities, across Black communities, within Black families, across Black families, within Black neighborhoods or hoods, across Black neighborhoods and hoods. We have to continually both yearn, but also try to create context in which people can enter and feel enough trust that they're willing to be vulnerable.
Yes.
And I think that's another way of describing Northwest African American Museum. I mean, I haven't had a chance to spend as much time as I like, but my hunch is when you walk in, the spirit of the people I'm talking about is right there, though, isn't it?
Absolutely.
That tradition is right there. Not to romanticize, not to idealize, but simply to say, these are they who, in the midst of unbelievable hatred and trauma and exploitation, stood up, fought back, and created context wherever they could. Sometimes it was just a nightclub. Sometimes it was a church and a mosque and a temple. Sometimes it was in a classroom. Sometimes it's on the corner. Sometimes it's in the basement. Sometimes it's in the kitchenette. But whatever that context is, in the barbershop. I know that's where I spent a lot of my time as a young brother. Gaining a whole lot of wisdom. I didn't spend no time in the beauty salon, but I know mom and my sisters was over there getting the same kind of thing. You see, a context in which you could feel as if you could be yourself, be vulnerable, but also learn a whole lot. That's what part of the values and virtues and visions are passed from one generation to the next. And of course, the library is very important as well, very much so. But
all of these spaces for love warriors is what I'm hearing you say. All these places to cultivate intimacy, all these spaces to create greater community trust and family.
Absolutely. Very, very much so. I mean, part of the spiritual warfare against Black people is to try to circumscribe these spaces and places where we could gain that kind of self-confidence and self-respect to be able to confront a white supremacist world. You see, because if you don't believe in yourself and you don't have others who believe in you, others who love you enough to convince you to believe in yourself, then you're always just going to be someone who can be used and abused by powers that be. Because you're looking for recognition, you're looking for admiration, and you can get recognized and admired by folk who hate your mama. That's the worst thing you want. The worst thing you want, you see. Can't stand your cousins, but act like you so exceptional, they say. You say, wait a minute. Now, I don't exist without mom and dad and baby brother and them. Well, I can't stand them, but we like you. Well, no, you got more work to do. You got more work to do. And in fact, one of the reasons why I can accept you as a white brother or white sister, or whatever, is because I learned how to love from my own folk. You see what I mean? And when you have a deep love, it always spills over. It's impossible to have a deep, profound love of anybody or anything that doesn't enable you to love others. That's one of the laws of love.
Well, may I ask you, and I don't know how we're going to segue with keeping this question of love, but a lot of people have questions about what happened at Harvard. And so I'm wondering what you might be able to share with the audience here. As I was reading excerpts of the great Robin D.G. Kelly's letter, that we are appalled. We are absolutely appalled. We are in disbelief, and maybe you could shed some light on the situation, please.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to spend too much time in the sense that it's on my case because Black folk are being disrespected and devalued across the board in so many different ways, much worse than myself. But there's simply no way that you can account for somebody like myself who's tenured at Yale in 1984, university professor at Harvard, 17 professors out of 1,500 in 1997, university professor at Princeton in 2002, 17 professors out of 1,300, and then come back to Harvard and a committee recommends a tenure process, and they say, no, it's too fraught, it's too controversial. I said, well, wait, what's going on now? See, this is a key sweat moment. Something just ain't right. You know, we need to excavate. Let's find out what's really going on. Could be academic, could be my age, because the Gifford lectures have already asked me to speak, and that's a lectureship that has a kind of a Nobel Prize equivalent in terms of the philosophy of the 20th century, like William James, John Dewey, Alfred North Whitehead. So I'll be giving those lectures in Scotland. So they think I still got something to say as an older brother, you see. So I figured it had to be political. There's no doubt about that. And Harvard's got its best and Harvard's got its worst. There's no doubt about that. But it's just another way of disrespecting Black folks. So even as a Christian, you see, I believe in charitable Christian hatred. I learned that in Vacation Bible School in Shiloh Baptist Church, where you hate the sin and still try to stay in contact with the humanity of the sinner and even love the sinner. So I hate injustice. I hate unfairness. And not simply to me, because I think it's unfair and unjust to me. So I hate that. I loathe it. But that doesn't mean I go around hating people, because people can change, you know, and everybody made in the image and likeness of God, and therefore they're capable of undergoing transformation. And I don't lose that in any way. So that in that sense, I try to connect it to the ways in which Black folk are being disrespected across the board, in business, on the job, on the street, with the police, in classrooms. I mean, white supremacy takes so many different forms in that way, but I don't give white supremacy any kind of major point of reference. You see, my point of reference is a tradition that I'm talking about, you see. So I'm not surprised by evil. I'm not surprised by white supremacy. I'm not paralyzed by despair. I'm not paralyzed by white supremacy somehow being so almighty. It is mighty, but it's not almighty. And it can be pushed back. We pushed it back before. We have to continually push it back. So in that sense, what happened to me was just another example of a Black person, in this case, a Black brother, who was disrespected. He was devalued in the eyes of the whole world. Because in the eyes of the world, Harvard looks like a fool. I mean, it's like, please get off the crack pipe. Hot under God's heaven. You're not going to allow for a tenure process to go to somebody who's been through this kind of thing. So I just said, you know, y'all could kiss my so-and-so. I went on back to New York. I'm headed back to Union Theological Seminary, where I started my teaching in 1977. I'm going to be in James Cone's own office. James Cone is one of the towering figures of Black liberation theology. I come back to his office. We got Sister Kelly, Brown, Douglas, and so many other Black folk, and white, and Asian, and Latino there at Union. It's a smaller place right across the street from Farrah Griffin and Sadia Hartman at Columbia. So we still have a community. Robert O'Mealy and the others. So I've been very blessed to find a place to land. A lot of people don't have places to land. But it's just a sign, again, that you should never, ever look at yourself. We should never look at ourselves through a white normative gaze. Never. You see, that we look at ourselves through how those who loved us looked at us. It's still critical, but Mama was critical of me. You know, I was a gangster when I was growing up, and I was a gangster before I met Jesus, and now I'm a redeemed sinner with gangster proclivities. So I'm still working on it after all these years. So Mama had to straighten me out just like Dad did, just like Grandmama and Granddad. But that's the lens through which you view yourself. But then you learn from, you know, Europeans. Europeans got something to say. They got the best of their tradition. They got the crimes as well. We learn from our Asian brothers and sisters. They got the best. They got crimes as well. African civilizations and all of their richness, they got the best. They got African crimes as well. Indigenous brothers and sisters, they got so many deep, wise insights, formulations, ways of organizing society, but they also have the worst in terms of their forms of domination and so forth. And once you have that kind of jazz-like, flexible, improvisational way of trying to understand the world and yourself, I think it helps us to be empowered. It equips us better. And so I'm not really worried about Harvard. I say, well, this is the second time, as you know, same thing happened in 2002. Same exact thing. Maybe I probably shouldn't have gone back in the first place, but.
Well, thank you for answering that. We had so many people that wrote in. I felt like I had to do it. But we will move on. We will move on.
That's beautiful about this.
So the next question is about love and capitalism. And the question for you is, are these two things incompatible? So in particular, one person writes, in the coming years, how might we think of each other in a loving, economic sense as we build wealth for our community? And I'm assuming this is for our Black communities.
Well, you know, Du Bois has a wonderful, wonderful formulation where he says, I just hope and pray that the rich spiritual depth of Black people is not eclipsed by the land of dollars and smartness. This is 1903. You can already see the ways in which you see, and it's biblical, but it's also just human insight, you know, that if you view the world like a gold rush, you're going to end up worshiping the golden calf. And the golden calf is an idol. And you're going to transform the golden rule that he or she who has the gold must rule. That ain't the golden rule. Now that's a distortion. Do unto others, you'd have others to do unto you. That's the golden rule. I was just talking to the great Sonny Rollins, Colossus, Sonny Rollins, close partner of Coltrane. He said, Brother West, we've lost any connection to the golden rule. Why? Because the rule of money, the rule of liquidity, the rule of money tied to power has taken over, not just the society, but our own souls. And this is Sonny Rollins. And when August Wilson had Aunt Esther die in 1985, she was born in 1619. She was that historic figure in his 10-play cycle. This is a great genius from Pittsburgh, August Wilson, right? I said, Brother August, how come you got Sister Esther die in 1985? He said, Brother West, the market's taking over our souls. It's taking over. See, it's survival of the slickest and the richest. You see, and you can see elements of it in the culture, even in the greatest cultural genre in the last 50 years in hip hop. You see, you got all of that rich Socratic questioning and deep love in the first and second waves. And then all of a sudden, what becomes hegemonic as the labels take over, recording industries want to sell it, especially to vanilla sides of town. We want the stereotypes. We want the vicious conceptions of women. We want all to talk about glitz and blitz so that let freedom ring becomes bling bling. No, they're not the same thing. Not the same thing. The genius from the south side of Chicago, Lorraine Hansberry, Raised It in the Sun. What does Mama say? Never been a character full of more love on the American stage than Mama in a Raised It in the Sun. What did she say to Brother Walter? Things have changed. We used to talk about freedom and all you talk about is money, money, money. And what happens in his chase for money? The family almost goes under. Then Walter has a change. Well, that's part of the genius of Hansberry, right? Lorraine, she bringing him back to his tradition, you see. So that it's a real, it's a problem. Capitalism at its worst is a gangsterization of the world. It will do anything for profit, anything for money, and then try to rationalize it. Now, capitalism as an economic system that has strong countervailing forces against it, non-market values, like democratic forces of regulation, right? Like strong cultures and families and churches and mosques and so forth that are concerned with non-market values, like love and trust and you can think of a whole, joy and so forth, and joy versus pleasure. Pleasure is much more capitalist. Joy is much more profoundly human. Then you can say, okay, we can understand. We have some capitalist societies that have strong countervailing forces, but if those countervailing forces are not strong enough to deal with some of the ugly effects of a capitalist economy, sooner or later, then chicken's gonna come home to roost. You're gonna end up with class struggles. You're gonna end up with unbelievable wealth inequality, which means nobody has security. On a global scale, of course, it's imperialism. You start looking for profits all around the world. You do anything to do it. But the United States and Central America, with its various fruit companies and so forth, just doing anything, overthrowing democratic regimes in Guatemala and El Salvador. Same would be true in Africa. Just do anything to gain access to the resources. Massive genocide in Belgian Congo before the genocide of the precious Jewish brothers and sisters in Germany. The precious Black Africans in the Congo had already undergone genocide. Not a lot to talk about. You see what I mean? Yeah. So I think that, we have to have serious critiques of the worst features of capitalism and try to tease out, what does capitalism do, which is positive? It does generate technological innovation. It does generate scientific breakthroughs, but it's under the aegis of profit maximization. That's why we can't have Medicare for all. It's ridiculous. We can't have Medicare for all. But why? Because private, insurance, pharmaceutical companies, and even our Black leaders, as you know, receive so much money from pharmaceutical companies. So they stand up there and talk about, well, I'm for Black folk, but I'm not for Medicare for all. I say, really? Interesting. Let's follow the money. Let's follow the money. But see, it's hard to do, you critical Black folk being Black. That's like me coming out of Obama all the time. Old people come at me tooth and nail. Brother West, you lost your mind. What you talking about? He's tired of Wall Street, all that Wall Street crime, and not one Wall Street executive goes to jail. Yes, I'm gonna raise my voice when Letitia and Jamal get caught with one crack bag and go for year after year after year, and these Wall Street criminals don't get one day, don't even get a trial. And it's partly because they were so tied into, the Obama administration. That's another issue. But I just say that in terms of love, democracy, justice versus capitalist forms of organizing the economy. But we do have to work with what we got. And we've had a world capitalist economy for over 400 years, and we've had massive failures of socialist and communist experiments. And so we try to do what we can. That's why Bernie Sanders was so important. That's why I spent so much time with him. Do what we can in the name of love and justice, given the powers of corporate elites, given the powers of monopolies and oligopolies. I know that's a long answer and still very brief, but I'm glad to be able to say a few words about that.
No, that was wonderful. I think that we needed to hear that. I'm going to ask you this last question. There was lots of questions around youth and education, and there's been some movement here locally for Seattle Public Schools to have some Black Studies curriculum, and we would love to hear you talk about the importance of Black Studies for younger children, particularly for K-12 education.
Well, one is that education at its deepest level is the cultivation of critical sensibilities coming out of Athens. It's Socratic. Now, it could come out of Timbuktu, it could come out of New Delhi and so forth, but in the Western context of the last number of hundreds of years, we're talking about unleashing critical consciousness. So again, like Carter Woodson, we want all young people, but especially Black folk, to muster the courage to think critically for themselves. They're not imitating anybody. We talked about the voice versus the echo, you see. But see, Socrates never cries, he never sheds a tear. See, that means something wrong with Socrates. Anybody's never cried, never been in love with nobody. See, I've already cried for my mama. I'm gonna cry even more at the funeral. I cried for some of my relationships, but I won't go into that right now. But tears is a sign that you're not numb on the inside.
It's vulnerability.
Exactly what we were talking about.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
Socrates at his best can exemplify intellectual integrity in terms of following the questioning with no easy answers, or turning easy answers into deep questions. But if he never sheds a tear, he's not loving people. He's loving wisdom in the abstract. That's something different. See, that's something different. And that's where the legacy of Jerusalem comes in. You see, Hebrew scripture begins with the cries of an oppressed people, enslaved. And Jesus weeps because he loves Lazarus. He loves Jerusalem. He goes into the temple and runs out the money changer. See, that temple was the largest complex east of Rome. They had hundreds of Roman troops on one side. They had the bankers on the inside. They had the intellectuals on the other side. Jesus makes it through 2 waves of security in order to run the money changers out. And that's why he's arrested. That's why he's convicted. That's why he's crucified by the Roman Empire as a political criminal. And you say, "Ooh, wow, you don't see that Jesus on the walls of churches, do you?" No, Jesus looked like Michelangelo's uncle up there smiling. He's so sweet and kind and everything. He got crucified because he went against the money changers. What is the temple of contemporary America? White House, Congress, Pentagon, Harvard, University of Washington, Hollywood, Silicon Valley, and Wall Street. Now, all of those are places of tremendous power, tremendous stature. Doesn't mean all the individuals in there are wrong. You can be a force for good inside the temple. You can be a force for good inside the University of Washington. You can be a force for good inside of Congress. But the dominant orientation is tied to money, status, upward mobility of fame, and so on. You see, that's what Jesus was over against. That's why he was crucified. That's why Peter couldn't take it. He got scared. He died 3 times. Why? Because he said, "No, this price is too much to pay." So this is where courage comes in. And part of we got to teach young people is they have to have the courage to think critically. They have to have the courage to love others, no matter who they are. And then they have to have the courage to hope. They have the courage to hope. And hope has nothing to do with optimism. Just like it has nothing to do with pessimism. I know I got my brothers and sisters part of the Afro-pessimist movement. I love them to death. I just don't think that they reach the right conclusions, but I understand what they're talking about. You know, blackness associated with abjection, blackness associated with subjection, blackness appropriate, always associated being trashed. Yes, that's part of our history, but we got a history in which we've also generated hope in the face of that abjection. And we fight. And as long as we in motion, Curtis Mayfield said, just keep on pushing. Hope is a verb. As well as a virtue. You keep in motion, just like at your center. Y'all know you're dealing with white supremacy, overcoming, and so you just stay in motion. You look in the eyes of your students, look in the eyes of your young folk and say, "Hey, that sparkle gonna keep that kindling inside of me, and I'm gonna go down swinging like Duke Ellington. Don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing, and that swing got to have staying in it. That's what that love of truth in the swing, you see." And so that's hope. And some of the Afro-pessimists would agree with me, because I mean, some of them actually are part of the Black Lives Movement that I've had a chance to work with at times. And I'm sitting right next to an Afro-pessimist. He or she fighting just like me. I said, "Hey, well, that's cool then. You know, we throw it down together. And I got Jesus, you got Afro-pessimism. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go." But others too often become spectators. See, the worst thing about any form of pessimism is you become a spectator.
Yep, it's the apathy.
You become a spectator when people are suffering. You got to be a participant. You got to be involved. You got to be willing to fight. You see, you got to be a warrior. You know, back to the love warrior we talked about.
Absolutely, and to not be scared of jumping in. Right.
That's exactly right.
Yes.
That's exactly right.
And I have another question here from Janie Hendricks, who would like for you to comment on what you see as the Black political agenda for the next 5 to 8 years. And she particularly wants to hear you talk about what young authors and or scholars you're excited about. They may or may not be Afro-pessimists from what I'm hearing.
No, what I mean, we got some brilliant Afro-pessimists.
Oh, yes.
Saxton and Frank and them got a lot to say. Because again, by lifting every voice, we can learn from a lot of people we disagree with. That's very important to keep in mind. They may not be my major source of inspiration, but I learn from them, and I try to read closely and try to get inside of their minds. But in terms of the political agenda, I think first and foremost, we have to be abolitionists. We have to be abolitionists. So I believe in the abolition of poverty. This is why I'm with my dear brother William Barber and Sister Thea Harris of the Poor People's Campaign. And you can't be an abolition of poverty unless you're actually talking about conceiving of ways in which wealth is produced, distributed, and made available. And by wealth, I'm not just talking about income, but we're also talking about goods and services. We've got to be an abolitionist about white supremacy. Now that is visionary, because white supremacy cuts so deep in the U.S. culture, very deep. But we got to be an abolitionist, and we have to begin with ourselves, because white supremacy is inside of the souls of Black people. So you can't talk about you fighting against structural racism here, and racism is in your mind and in your dream. And so it's a perennial struggle. The same is true with, I want to abolish male supremacy. Oh, Lord, that's vision. I've been around for thousands of years. That's right. That's right. That's our goal. We're trying to abolish. And where do we start? Both in structures and institutions, but also inside of our hearts, minds, and souls. We got patriarchy inside. We got misogyny inside. And you do that by means of collectivity. They do that by means of groups that allow you to be empowered to fight it.
That's right.
And I could go on and on of other forms of abolition as well. I mean, I like to see the abolition of imperialism, the abolition of asymmetric relations of power and empire, and so forth. So these are very, very long-term visions, but it ought to inform us as to how we proceed. So we know that in the end, it's not just about us individually. That's very important. Because see, once you give up on any ideal or any vision, next thing you know, it's just one's ego that sits at the center. And where there is no vision, the people perish. People perish because there's too much egoism and narcissism and egocentrism and narrow individualism taking place. Everybody trying to get theirs. They're not concerned about the others on the other side of town, especially those in the hood, in the barrios, on the reservation, poor whites in Appalachia and so forth.
Thank you. Thank you. And for a closing question, a personal one, how do you remain so hopeful?
Well, again, I just got so much love injected in me by Irene B. West, Clifton West, and T. Rose, and Reverend C.L. West, my grandfather, Metropolitan Baptist Church, Tulsa, Oklahoma. All of that love is inside of me. So I really can't make it to the crack house if I wanted to. Even if I made a dash to the crack house. I just think I have all of these memories of all of this love coming at me, and how I could use my gifts to be of service to others, and had that burning in my soul. You know what I mean? And so in that sense, I really don't worry about losing the hope. I really don't. I just got too many things that I've got to do, and too many things behind on. And in the end, it's a joy. I don't want to miss out on the joy, because there's joy in the struggle. I would never, ever have given up the struggle and missed out on all of that joy. People say, oh, Brother West, you'd have missed out on a whole lot of pleasure. Well, I ain't no Puritan, but I guess I'm behind a little bit. But I got some joy, y'all. I can tell you that. And the memories of joy is something that nobody can take away from you. Be you in jail, or the struggles in the classroom, or struggles on the street, or struggles you know, in the church or whatever it is, that it just makes it a fundamental part of yourself to be on fire and to find joy in the fire that you're trying to spread, and the joy that you're trying to spread, the justice that you're trying to spread. Very much so.
And I know I keep telling you last question, but we keep getting questions flooding
that's
in.
good.
And
That's
so
good.
I
That's
promise
fine.
this will be the last one.
No, it
which
doesn't have
is
to be the last question. We just flow. We keep it flowing.
for all the people that are out there and thinking about what is the one thing or the main thing that we can do, leaving this talk, this incredible, inspiring talk, to help make our world better, what would you say?
I would start with a wholesale support of the museum itself. Because the museum brings together the quest for truth, the quest for beauty, the quest for goodness. You're gonna find some religious folk in that museum, just like you're gonna find some non-religious folk. So that the quest for the holy is part and parcel of what the museum is about, part and parcel of the tradition that I was talking about. And from the museum, you then make a decision to cultivate your own critical orientation. You make a decision to engage in forms of becoming more mature in one's own formation of one's personality, one's soul, become more loving, become more sacrificial and service oriented. Then you find a place to execute it. And that's the decision nobody can make for you, you know, because you might be a poet, you know, you may be a pharmacist, you may be a doctor, you may be a lawyer, you may be a professor, you may be a plumber, you may be a hip hop artist, you may be so many different things, but never ever allow that career to get in the way of your calling. Never ever. Never allow your profession to get in the way of your vocation. Never allow any kind of job to get in the way of your life task, what you on the earth to do. And sometimes it takes a little while to find out exactly what it is, but when you find out, you realize, no, it's not about a job. It's about something that I'm called to do. This is my mission. You think of your magisterial scholarship, my dear sister, it's clear that you are called to engage in the wrestling with these kinds of questions. You see, communication, media, hybridity, mulatto, raciality, all of the different issues that go into wrestling with what it means to be human under white supremacist context, but critiques of those contexts, mobilizing all of the rich resources of the various peoples that you're keeping track of and their own creativity, their intellect and their generosity and so on, you see. And that's a beautiful thing, but it's tough. You know, it's very tough. And I think you've handled it in a stellar way. You really have. It's a beautiful thing. University of Washington is very blessed to have you, just like our dear sister B, Lanisha, is blessed to have to bring us together again, and with Brother Taylor, Ed Taylor. I'm not talking about Paul Taylor, Brother Ed Taylor, Natasha, and Andrea, and Trish, and all of them there. I don't want to overlook Sister Candace either. Oh, indeed.
Well, we have all been so blessed to be here with you this evening and to have our cups filled up and to just feel like we can return to love in a different way. I think that the revolutionary nature of love is really what I'm going to be taking away from this evening. And I think Lanisha is going to join us here again now to close us out.
Thank you, Dr. West and Dr. Joseph. Whew. We were in such deep need of these truths, of this conversation. Thank you both so much, Dr. West. We needed to hear that no form of indignity can extinguish our humanity. Thank you for that. We needed to hear that our genius comes in a variety of different forms. Thank you for that. We needed to hear to live in the funk. Thank you for that. We needed to hear to hold on to excellence in the face of trauma. We needed to hear everything that you spoke tonight. We thank you for helping us come to common ground, to higher ground, to hallowed ground tonight. And thank you so much for this conversation. It will be a continued source of strength and resilience for us in the days and the months and the years to come. We are just so grateful to you for sharing your very best with us tonight, Dr. Joseph. Amazing as always. We are so grateful that we just heard this conversation from you two tonight. And Dr. West, our deepest condolences and our heartfelt prayers to you in the passing of your beloved mother. Thank you for sharing with us the love that she shared with you.
Wow, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Definitely.
We are so honored. Thank you both, Dr. West and Dr. Joseph. Thank you. And to all of our generous sponsors and contributors to the program tonight, thank you. I will acknowledge our sponsors again because they were so generous with supporting this evening. And that is the University of Washington Department of Communication, the University of Washington Race and Equity Initiative, the University of Washington Department of Philosophy, and the Seattle University Office of Diversity and Inclusion. We are so grateful. Tonight, we've met a representative from the University of Washington, our phenomenal moderator, Dr. Joseph. And so now we will hear from Ms. Natasha Martin, Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion at Seattle University. Ms. Martin.
Thank you so much, Lanisha, and greetings, Seattle, and all of you who are with us this evening. I must say that I am ending this evening full and inspired. So thank you, Dr. West, for reminding us who we are. As so many of us are looking for hope at this precarious time, you have reminded us that, in fact, we are hope and offered an invitation to us to be hope. Amplifying the Black tradition, sort of listening to you rehearse all of these amazing scholars and writers and artists and contributors and activists. You painted a picture for us of the well of strength and love from which we spring. And in solidarity with others willing to sacrifice for the humanity of Black people, you reminded us that we belong to each other. And this is a pathway to freedom. And so to be in conversation with you in this way is rare and beautiful. So thank you and Dr. Joseph for your excellence and authentic facilitation. Partnering with the Northwest African American Museum is a true gift. And we are grateful for the opportunity to sit with the Seattle community and explore and experience the spirit of Dr. West, the legacy of Irene B. West. Thank you, Lanisha D. Barter-Laban, for your fierce leadership and for extending your hand to me and to Seattle University to collaborate with you and the Northwest African American Museum. Your vision is bold and necessary as a meeting place, a sacred place to foster belonging, build community, and where Black people can see themselves, and together with the broader Seattle community and beyond, where we can honestly confront the world as it is, the whole truth of it, so that together we can courageously create one that is more loving, more just, and more humane. Seattle University is deeply committed to creating a just and humane world. And as a Jesuit Catholic university, we are committed to racial equity and justice, not only in our stated values and mission, but we also commit to it as institutional practice. And as imperfect as we all are, we look forward to co-creating and partnering with the Northwest African American Museum and the Seattle community, because it does truly take a village, as Lanisha has mentioned, to have strength for the journey. So as I close, I just want to share with you that the connection to community is a strongly held value at Seattle University. And In that vein, we have announced our framework for the university to continue advancing inclusive excellence and to align anti-racism with our strategic direction and purpose. And that is known officially as Lift SU, which is our action plan for racial equity. And I invite all of you to join us and be a part of it in the ways that you can. But most importantly, to support the Northwest African American Museum, because it is these kinds of spaces and organizations within our community where we can find home. So thank you so much for the generosity of this moment, and be well.
Thank you so much, Vice President Martin, for being with us, for those words that just nurture us. We are so grateful to be in partnership with you and with the University of Washington. And yes, together we will do, as Dr. West said tonight, we will engage in an excavation. We will look at ourselves through the gaze of those who love us, and we will continue to make hope a verb and stay in motion. We are so grateful to our generous sponsors, and we are grateful tonight to NAAM's dedicated staff, Patrice and Jen, Jason, Jamala. Thank you all so much for your dedication, all of our volunteers, our UW graduate students, Marcus and Jazz, and Town Hall. We thank them all for their involvement tonight. And we welcome you all who are tuned in tonight to come back on May 19 at 6 p.m. when we will commemorate the birthday of Malcolm X in partnership with Seattle Central College, with a virtual conversation featuring award-winning author Ilyasa Shabazz, the daughter of Malcolm X. And we also invite you to tune in June 13 through June 19, when NAAM will host an entire week-long celebration and commemoration of Juneteenth. And tune in to our future virtual Descendants series this year. We'll be in conversation with the descendants of W.E.B. Du Bois in August and Harriet Tubman in October. Lastly, visit us at our Knowledge is Power book giveaway pop-up in a neighborhood near you. There is truly something for everyone with the Northwest African American Museum. So be sure to follow us on social media and subscribe. Because our three pillars at NAAM is to advance justice and equity, to cultivate educational empowerment, and to center and celebrate the Black arts, heritage, and culture. And as Dr. West says, all in a spirit of love. We believe in changing our community, our region, and our nation through anti-racist education, inclusive history, and the power of the Black arts. And it takes a village to make all of this happen. We will now receive a concluding musical performance from violinist, composer, storyteller, educator, and community activist Benjamin Hunter. He's a musician who has dedicated his life to transforming the world's status quo into a vibrant, inclusive, and compassionate society. Ben's work explores the intersection of music and art, community, policy, and culture. He is as comfortable playing classical as he is playing blues and jazz. So enjoy this next closing musical presentation. We'll see you all again soon, and thank you.
Hello, everybody. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with you all today. And to our guest, Dr. West, I saw you in college many years ago when you came to visit, and it's an honor to be able to play for you. This next song I'm going to perform is by the great Stevie Wonder, and as we talk about taking a village, this song "Higher Ground," is about striving. And to do that, we got to do that collectively in a village. We got kind of reaching for higher ground, but we can't do it by ourselves. We got to do it together. So this is my version of higher ground. And the people that keep on learning, and the soldiers that keep on warming, and the world that keeps on turning, and it won't be too long. And the powers that keep on lying, and the people and they keep on dying, and the world it keeps on turning, and it won't be too long. Cause I'm so darn glad he let me at it again. When my last time on earth I lived a whole world of scene. And I'm so darn glad I know more than I knew then. I'm gonna keep on trying till I reach the highest ground. And the teachers keep on teaching, and the preachers they keep on preaching, and the world it keeps on turning, and it won't be too long. Yeah. And the lovers they keep on loving, and the believers they keep on believing, and the sleepers just stop your sleeping, cause it won't be too long. Thank you very much.